Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited today because I am a guest designer for Pear Blossom Press. I absolutely love cards that have movement to them, that do some interesting things, and the easy lights from Pear Blossom Press make it so easy to add an interactive element to your cards. I'm going to be using some easy lights that have 3 lights to them with one button. This way, with one easy click, I'm going to be able to light up the different lights in the die set, or the different windows in the die set that I plan on using. I'm also going to be using this stamp set from Pear Blossom Press to use the Press Here stamp, which is absolutely perfect to share with people exactly what to do for the card to make it interactive. I'll be using the City Holiday die set from Spellbinders. I thought this was the perfect opportunity to light up several of the windows on this building. When I first got this die set, my first thought was to create a light up card, and I didn't do it yet, so this is the perfect opportunity for that. I did a lot of my die cutting off screen, so I have a bunch of pieces here in my craft stacks ready to go, but I'll share with you how I did the openings in the front of my building here. That little card that I showed there is the color inspiration that I'm using, so I'm using a bunch of blues as well as pinks with some white glitter cardstock accents. So to create the front of my card, I used some windy cardstock, which is the light blue. This sample here is just done at a white cardstock, and I chose the outdoor or the frame for the door as well as the bottom window, and then one of the inner pieces for the smaller windows in the building. I'm using some best ever craft tape in order to tape those dies in place. So what I'm doing here is creating windows, creating openings for my lights to be able to show through. Because I used the die set for the front of the building, I have some indents in it showing exactly where all of those windows are, so it makes it easy to place those dies to know exactly where they go. I do like to tape them in place to make sure that they don't move on me when I'm doing that die cutting. So the door and the window at the bottom only need to be done once. The inside pieces of the window for the upper layers get done until all of those windows are opened. Now I wanted to add a little bit of texture to my building, so I'm using this brick by brick embossing folder. This is actually one of the October clubs for Spellbinders. Any brick folder would work, even say a brick press plate that would just indent the pattern on there. I just thought it was a great opportunity to add that texture. You could always skip this step if you don't have a brick folder or you don't want that extra texture to it. So I taped that piece, that die cut, in place and then embossed it. And then after doing that embossing for the first time, I went and took a VersaMark pad and inked the grout line area of that embossing folder. So when I taped that piece in place, I made sure that when I felt my embossing, I taped it on the side where the bricks were raised, so then I could ink on the side where the grout part was raised. After inking it with VersaMark ink, I pulled it off of my embossing folder, took that tape off, and then I poured on some Lost Shadow Distress Glaze in those areas. It sticks to anywhere that VersaMark ink is. You could also use white embossing powder here if you want. I thought white was going to be a little bit too bright and a little bit too stark, so the gray is just a little bit more subtle. And because it's embossing glaze, it's transparent, so it's going to have a slight blue tone to it because I'm using blue cardstock underneath here. You could also use white cardstock for this base for the building and then follow the next steps, and you would end up getting a very similar look to it, but the grout lines would be just a little bit lighter and a little bit brighter because of that white base instead of the blue cardstock. So I'm using my embossing tool to melt all of that powder. And the cool thing here is it goes to a nice glossy finish. I'm going to be doing some little bit of ink blending on the front of the building just to give it a little bit more character. And those grout lines, that embossing is going to resist that ink, so those will stay the color that they are. You could also, if you wanted, instead of doing the embossing, if you don't like that glossy finish, you could also use ink on your embossing folder to ink those grout lines to get them a different color. But depending on the color you're going to do your ink blending with, it might take on some of that color. So it might not resist, or it won't resist that ink quite as well as that embossing glaze does. And I really like the look of, or the difference in finish that glaze gives it. So to put window panes in my windows, I'm going to use a piece of acetate here. So I have a piece of acetate cut to the size of my building. I'm using some Sukwang tape. This is 1/4 inch to add lines so that it tapes it to that acetate. You could also use a liquid glue here if you want, but then you would have to wait for that to completely dry. And the nice thing about the double-sided tape is it sticks really well and there's no drying time to it. So for quick quickness, I'm using the tape here, but like I said, if you want to, you can use a liquid glue as well, and will work just as well for this. So after putting that tape there, and I'm fairly liberal with that tape because I want to make sure that that acetate is glued on really well, I'm going to glue that to my piece of acetate here. If there happens to be any excess going over the edge, you can just use some scissors to trim that down, or you could even cut a piece that's just slightly smaller than your piece there. So off screen, I cut out all of those cross things on the inside of the windows. I want to be able to put the curtains as well as the other pieces on those windows and not have to line them up or anything. So by moving those and taking those out, they're not an issue. When I did my tape, those weren't taped down anyway, so it's easy enough to grab a piece or a pair of detailed scissors to cut them out. You could also cut them out before putting it onto the acetate, which I had intended to do and then completely forgot. So all of my pieces, I have them laid out exactly how I plan on gluing them to my building. You want to make sure to glue the front of your card together before doing anything else. Technically, you could do the other pieces or like your lighting feature and stuff like that now if you really wanted to. But I like to glue all of the details on because some of those are going to cover pieces of the acetate. So those are going to cover different areas that I could possibly have wires. So it's just easier to have this completely done. And then when I go to add my lights to my card, I can also make sure that I have perfect placement. I won't accidentally put a die cut in front of something that I don't, or in front of the light that I don't necessarily want to be covered. So by having this front part finished completely, it makes adding the lights a little bit easier in my opinion. So I have the frames of the windows die cut in some Indigo Cardstock, which is the nice dark navy blue. I have the curtains details done out of some chiffon or blush cardstock. And really you can do whatever color palette you want. I wanted to do something that was kind of wintry, but not a traditional, say, Christmas color palette. So you can really have a lot of fun with this. I chose to do 2 different pinks for the curtains, but you could always do the same color for all of them if you want. I tend to choose a color palette and then stick with that color palette. So while in a real apartment building or house or whatnot, you wouldn't necessarily have all exactly the same color tones for curtains. It just looks neater for the front of the card, in my opinion, if they're all coordinating. I am using a liquid glue to glue all of these pieces in place. I tend to use a liquid glue for most things. I have Barely Art glue here in my fine tip bottle. It means that I can glue down little teeny tiny die cuts, and I can also use that same glue to glue down my larger card bases. By having it in that fine tip bottle, it makes it really easy for little teeny tiny die cuts, and I can control how much glue comes out. The nice thing as well about liquid glue is it gives you some wiggle room for moving things to get some perfect placement. I do have a large acrylic block here that I often put on top of my pieces while they're drying, just to hold everything nice and flat, make sure that glue has some really good contact, and it frees up my hands to work on other things. So the cat and dog here, I have die cut out of velvet cardstock. I put it on, it's an adhesive velvet cardstock. I had put it on some scrap pieces of cardstock before die cutting them, but it's another way to really, really simply add extra texture to your pieces. It gives it something for people to touch, and it's just a nice and soft finish. It comes in all sorts of different colors as well, which makes it a fun little accent piece to add to your cards that's not necessarily expected. So the white tree in the bottom window, as well as the wreath on the door, are done with that white glitter cardstock from the Antique White Treasured Cardstock pack. That pack of cardstock has 5 different specialty cardstocks in it, one of them being that glitter. And I do love using a little bit of different cardstock textures in my cards. Again, it just is a really easy way to add some different texture. So once I have all of the details on the front of my building, I can add the roof, and then there's also some snow to go on top of the roof. Now, if you wanted, you could use this as an element on the front of your cards with the lights. I'm choosing to do a shaped card here, so this is going to be the shape of my card. I'm going to be just adding a very simple base on the back of it, but it's really easy to do this element with the lights behind it and just add it to the front of a card. You could do it on an A2 card and you would have just a very little bit of sky around it, or you could do it on a 5x7 card and have a lot more area around your building. It's your choice. So there are other options to change this up as well, not only with the color scheme, but with whatever you decide to do for your card. So these are the lights that I'm using here. They are easy lights. They come, this one is a 2-pack here, so there's 2 different ones. I'm only going to be using one for this card. When you get them, there's a battery included right in that card. And on that battery, there's a plus sign. And on the little button piece on the back, there's a plus sign there. You just make sure to slide the battery in so those plus signs meet, and it's good to go. When I'm putting them together, you'll notice that I regularly press that button and test it many times. I always want to make sure while I'm installing my lights that I don't accidentally do something that makes them not work. So I test it, I over test it while I'm creating. I use a little bit of that 1/4 inch suquang to glue that button to that door. So the door is where that trigger, where that button is going to be to press to make those lights turn on. On the back of my card here, I'm also using some Best Ever Craft tape. This one is 1/4 inch wide to tape down those wires. I want to make sure that those wires are nice and secure, and I don't want them to accidentally show up in those windows. So again, I put down that first line of lights, and these lines are fairly long for a card base, so you have a lot of flexibility. You can make sure that you can put them exactly where you want them to go. But by having that tape in place, I can make sure that they're not going to, those wires aren't going to stick out at the outside of the card or be showing through a window. I can make sure to have control over where they are visible. So as I'm putting them down, I'm only putting down one light at a time just to make sure that I'm paying attention to exactly what I'm doing. And once again, testing often. I put that piece of white cardstock underneath it to test because it just shows the light a little bit better than the glass surface that I'm working on. But by making sure that they're going to work, I don't get to the end of my card, go to put it on and something is wrong. So I know I have that reassurance while I'm creating that everything is working properly, everything is lighting up properly. So once I have that second one down, I can go and do the third one. And Pear Blossom Press has many different options for lighting. So you can just do a card with one light. You could do a card like this one here that has 3 different lights that light up with that same button. There are also ones that twinkle, which is really fun for, say, like a starry sky or just something where you want it to twinkle. There's a really cool candle one that you blow on to make that go out. There's also a ring one. So there's many options, and I love the fact that there's so many different ones to choose from. It makes it really easy to be able to customize your cards and choose exactly what you want or how you want it lit. So once I have all of my lights installed, everything nice and secure, and I've tested it to make sure that everything is working properly, I'm using some foam tape on the outside part of my building here, and I'll be using it on the inside part as well to give it some support. That battery pack has dimension to it, so you can't just glue this piece flat onto the front of a card. You have to use some foam tape in order to give it that dimension so that you have everything has that same raised amount. And my foam tape actually isn't thick enough, so I'm going to be doing a second layer of it. So after doing that first layer of the foam tape, I will take the backing off, and then I'm going to be going in and adding another layer exactly where it is. It doesn't need to be in a different place. It's going right on top, but if you look on the side there, you can see that that battery pack is just a little bit thicker than my tape is. So by adding that second layer of tape, I'm giving that battery pack the amount of clearance it needs. Now I'm choosing to do white cardstock for my background to go behind those windows. Whatever color you choose is going to be visible through the acetate part of those windows. So I did actually put it on or test it on a piece of light gray cardstock just to give it a different color or a bit of a different color difference. But I found that, in my opinion, the lights just looked brighter. It just looked cleaner on the white cardstock. So that's what I ended up going with. But what I would suggest, because you can see right through and because you can test while you're going, test it on other colors to see if you like something a little bit different. It may be for your taste or for the look that you're going for that a different color might be the best for you. So once I have that foam tape and I know that my piece is ready to go on the front of a card, and that's the piece that if you want to put it on an A2 card base, you use that piece exactly as is. Like I said, I'm making a shaped card, so I chose to cut 2 pieces of white cardstock, just slightly smaller than the front of that building. Mine end up being 3.5 inches by 5 1/8 inches. I use my score pal to score from the top and I scored it at the 4.5-inch mark. And then I used my liquid glue to glue those pieces together so that I have a nice hinge there. You could, if you wanted, use a piece of cardstock that was 3.5 by 10.25 and then just score it at the 1/8 inch mark if you didn't want to glue your backing or your back of your card together the way I did. I typically like gluing them this way because I find that it stands better for me. I like that hinge that I created on here better than, say, a fold for these type of cards. But I would try for you and see what works best for you. So once I have it on the back of that card base, I'm going to add that push here element to the front of the card. Now that door, when you die cut it, it has texture to it. So it has details for the front of the door. So if it was just flat, I would have stamped this right to that door front and then not had to do this extra piece here. But because that door itself has those details, it's not flat. If I were to stamp it on there, it wouldn't actually stamp really clearly. We would have gaps in our letters. So I'm choosing just to use a scrap of Indigo Cardstock and stamp it with some white ink. Here I'm using Lisa Horton Opaque White ink. I will stamp it multiple times using the Misty Stamping Tool. This way I can go over exactly the same area multiple times till I have the darkness that I want. Now I don't necessarily need it super, super bright. It just needs to be enough that you can read press here. I don't want that press here to overtake the card and take attention away. I want it to give the recipient an indication of what to do with that piece, but I don't necessarily need it to take attention away from the other details that we have in the card. So once I've stamped it and I've got it dark enough, I can trim that down. I want to make sure that it's just a little bit narrower than the width of that door. When I cut it the first time, it wasn't quite centered, so I went and cut a little piece off just to make sure it's nice and centered. And because it is a separate piece of cardstock, but it's exactly the same color, you can see that it's a separate piece of cardstock when you look at the card closely, but the attention goes more to the press here part. I wanted to add the light bulb from that stamp set that it just says handmade on it, and I just thought it was cute with the light bulb on it. So I used some Chip Sapphire Distress ink and just stamped that on the back of the card. Here's that card with the lights off, and you can see how bright those lights are in the card. Just a fun way to add an interactive element, and it's really quite simple. Pear Blossom Press does make it so simple to create these cards because the devices to do them are really quite easy to use. So we have a fun interactive card, and you can make it a little bit simpler by not embossing the brick if you wanted to, but I just really love that detail to it. And in my opinion, this isn't the type of card that you'd make 100 of and send them to every single person on your list, but it's a fun one for those that you know appreciate, the ones that you would think that light up feature is cool. They're really quite easy to do with the easy lights. And there are just so many choices to use to customize your cards in this way. Thank you so much to Pear Blossom Press for inviting me to be a guest designer today. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I had so much fun making this card. I hope it inspired you to create a light up card soon. Thank you so much for the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.